Manhattan, Central Café. It's a March morning when everything crumbles. Alexander Vasquez, 34 years old, worth $3.8 billion, is sitting across from the woman he has loved for 3 years. He has just pretended to have lost everything to test Sophia's true love. But when she sees the photo of his 5-year-old daughter that he just showed her and speaks words he never would have imagined, Alexander's world collapses, because sometimes the truth we seek is the one that destroys us, and Alexander is about to discover that love, when it's false, can be crueler than any enemy. Central Café in Times Square was the perfect place for a conversation that would change everything. The large windows filtered the Manhattan morning light, while the aroma of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the discreet murmur of business and romantic conversations. Alexander Vasquez was sitting at table number 12, the one he had reserved for special occasions for the past 3 years. At 34, he was one of the richest men in America, heir to a real estate empire transformed into an international luxury colossus. His $3.8 billion fortune made him a golden bachelor. But for 3 years his heart had beaten only for one woman, Sophia Martinez. Sophia arrived with her natural elegance as always. Wavy brown hair, green eyes that always seemed to hide a secret, the smile that had conquered Alexander at their first meeting. She wore a beige coat, a designer purse that Alexander had given her, shoes that cost more than many people's monthly salary. For weeks, doubt had tormented Alexander. Did Sophia really love him, or did she love his wealth? His friends had warned him. His financial advisors had done discreet checks, but Alexander had always defended the purity of their love. Until he decided to put everything to the test, Alexander began his calculated lie. He had lost everything. The company had gone bankrupt. Debts and wrong investments had completely ruined him. He no longer had anything. He had to start from scratch, maybe move and find a normal job. The silence that followed was so dense that Alexander could feel his own heartbeats. Sophia looked at him intently, her face going from surprise to confusion, then to something Alexander couldn't yet decipher. Alexander studied every micro-expression of Sophia's face. He was looking for desperation for him, concern for their future together, words of encouragement. He was looking for love that overcomes everything. Instead, he saw something that chilled his blood. Sophia looked down, nervously playing with the $100,000 ring he had given her. She said she needed time to think, to understand what all this meant for them. Alexander felt the first blow to his heart. Not, "We'll face it together." Not, "I love you anyway," but "I need to think." But the worst was yet to come. Alexander took out a photograph. He showed her a 5-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes smiling in a park. The girl was named Emma. She was his cousin's daughter, but Sophia didn't know that. Alexander lied ruthlessly. He had always known he had a daughter. Her mother had died the previous year in an accident. Now Emma lived with him, and was all he had left. Sophia looked at the photograph as if it were a poisonous snake. Her green eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly, and Alexander saw something he had never seen before in the face of the woman he loved. Pure disgust. Alexander had studied every detail of that lie. Emma was really his cousin Sarah's daughter, and had really lost her mother, but lived happily with her father in Boston. Alexander had used a photo of them together taken during the last family Christmas. When Alexander asked if she would like to meet Emma, maybe during the weekend, Sophia put the photo on the table with determination. She said it was too much all at once. First him ruined, then a daughter. She couldn't handle all this. Alexander's heart truly began to break, not because of the fiction he had created, but because of the reality that was being revealed. The woman he had fantasized about marrying and having a family with was crumbling at the first invented obstacle. Sophia confessed she had had expectations about their relationship. Expectations that now she didn't know if they could be realized. She talked about plans for the future she had imagined. Marriage, travel, beautiful houses, freedom. And instead, he had a daughter, and now didn't even have money to support her. The truth, raw and ruthless, exploded between them like a bomb. Sophia wasn't talking about love. She was talking about a business plan for her own life, and Alexander had been the perfect client until 5 minutes before. When Alexander asked directly if she loved him only for his money, Sophia defended herself, saying it wasn't that simple. Money wasn't everything, but one had to be realistic. Love wasn't enough to live on. And a child. She wasn't ready to be a mother. Didn't even know if she ever would be. Alexander looked at that woman he had considered the love of his life and saw a stranger. How had he failed to see who she really was? How had he fallen in love with an illusion? When he asked what would happen if he managed to recover, rebuild everything, Sophia looked at him with something that resembled pity. She told him he was 34, had a child to raise, no money, no prospects. She was 28, still young. She couldn't ruin her life for... She didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. The message was clear. Alexander had become a burden, an obstacle to her dreams of wealth and freedom. In that moment, Alexander Vasquez, the man who owned one of the largest fortunes in America, felt truly poor for the first time in his life. Alexander remained seated at the cafe table, as if he had been struck by lightning. Sophia's words kept echoing in his head like painful echoes of a truth he didn't want to accept. Around him, the world kept moving, the clinking of cups, the laughter of other customers, the noise of Times Square traffic. But for him, everything was still, frozen in that moment of devastating revelation. His breathing had become labored, as if the very air of the cafe had become dense and unbreathable. He felt his pulse beating in his temples, a dull hammering that accompanied the collapse of everything he had believed in for 3 years. His hands trembled slightly while still holding Emma's photo, that innocent child who had unwittingly acted as a catalyst to reveal Sophia's true nature. Sophia continued with a forcedly sweet voice, but Alexander now felt every falsehood in that melody that once enchanted him. She said she had to think about her position, that she had always dreamed of a certain life. A family born from true love, not from complications of the past. Every word was like a nail driven into Alexander's heart. Complications of the past. That's how she had defined a 5-year-old child. Alexander looked again at Emma's photo. That sweet and innocent child with blonde hair and blue eyes smiling carefree in a park. He realized Sophia had failed on every possible front. She had not only shown no love for him in difficulties, but had shown inhuman coldness toward a child she believed was his daughter. Sophia's voice continued, but now Alexander heard it as if it came from very far away. She talked about deserving something different, about not being able to give up her dreams. Alexander realized she was describing their relationship as an investment that had gone bad, not as a love story that had ended. When Alexander insisted, asking what would be better for both of them, Sophia avoided his gaze for the first time in the conversation. Her green eyes, which he had always thought were deep like mysterious lakes, now seemed cold as ice to him. She looked out the window toward the luxury shops of Fifth Avenue, and Alexander understood her gaze was already searching for a future without him. Sophia said he should focus on his daughter, rebuild his life, find a woman more suitable for his new situation. And she had to think about her own future. She deserved someone who could give her stability, security. He couldn't help but notice how the words stability and security sounded like synonyms for money in her mouth. A woman more suitable for his new situation. A poor woman for a poor man. The classism in Sophia's words was so evident that Alexander wondered how he had failed to notice it before. Maybe because when you're on the other side of the barricade, when you're the one with the money, it's easy not to see the mechanisms of interest that surround you. It's comfortable to believe the world loves you for who you are, not for what you have. Alexander felt a pang in his stomach when he realized how many other people in his life might be there for the same reasons. How many of his friends, his collaborators, the people who frequented his penthouse on the Upper East Side, were genuine. The doubt spread like an oil stain, contaminating every memory, every relationship. When Alexander asked her directly if that child in the photo could never have been part of a proper family, Sophia's silence was more eloquent than any answer. She bit her lower lip, a gesture Alexander had always found seductive, but which now seemed to him the nervous tick of someone calculating the best response. Alexander understood that for Sophia, Emma represented everything she didn't want. Responsibilities, sacrifices, renunciations, a complication for the perfect life she had planned. It wasn't just a matter of not being ready to be a mother. It was a matter of not even wanting to consider the idea of loving someone who came with additional packages. The cafe around him continued its normal life. A businessman at the next table was talking on the phone about a corporate merger. A couple of tourists was browsing a New York guide. An elderly woman was reading the Times. Everyone was living their normal lives while his was crumbling piece by piece. Sophia got up from the table with studied movements, taking the Hermes bag he had given her for their second anniversary. Every gesture was elegant, controlled, perfect as always. But now Alexander saw the performance behind every movement. She said it was better to take a break, that she needed time to think. He had to fix his situation. His situation. Not his daughter, not his family, not his life. His situation, as if it were a logistical problem to solve, a setback in the planning of her own existence. Before leaving, Sophia turned one last time. The Louboutin heels, also a gift from Alexander, resonated on the cafe's marble like a countdown. She said she had really loved him, but that love sometimes wasn't enough. That she had to be realistic. Alexander saw her walk away among the cafe tables, pass in front of the bright shop windows of Times Square, disappear among the crowd of elegant New Yorkers and tourists dazzled by luxury. For a moment he had the impulse to run after her, to scream that everything was false, that he still had all his billions, that they could return to their perfect life. But he didn't do it because he had understood that that perfect life had been perfect only on the surface. Underneath there was emptiness, falsehood, interest disguised as passion. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Alexander remained seated alone with Emma's photo in his hands. The waiter approached discreetly to ask if he wanted anything else. Alexander shook his head and left a $50 tip for 2 coffees. The waiter thanked him with surprise, and Alexander realized it was the first genuine reaction he had seen that day. He called his driver, but then changed his mind. He needed to walk, breathe, feel the weight of his steps on the marble pavement of Times Square. While waiting, he looked again at Emma's photo. That innocent child had been involuntarily the instrument that revealed the truth to him. A truth that hurt, that broke his heart, but that was necessary. For 3 years he had loved a ghost, a projection of what he wanted to see. The real Sophia was a person who would abandon a man in his moment of need, who saw children as obstacles to her projects, who measured love based on bank account figures. When he finally left the cafe, Alexander realized Manhattan looked different to him. The luxury shop windows, the elegant buildings, the expensive cars parked on the avenues. Everything now seemed like a theatrical set to him. Beautiful but empty, bright but cold. The test was over and he had failed. Not because he hadn't passed the test, but because he had chosen the wrong person to subject to it. He had spent 3 years building a sandcastle, believing it was made of stone. As he walked home, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. True loneliness, but also a strange form of freedom. He was alone, yes, but he was also free. Free from lies, from illusions, from the daily performances of a love that had never existed. The pain was real, devastating. But so was the truth. And maybe, Alexander thought, looking at Manhattan's gray sky, truth was the only solid foundation on which something authentic could be built. Alexander spent the following days in a state of emotional numbness. Back in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he realized how empty and cold that luxury was without someone to really share it with. Every expensive object seemed to accuse him. He had built a golden cage to attract love, but it only attracted interest. Friday night, he received a message from Sophia. She had reflected a lot and wanted to see him. She had something important to tell him. Alexander stared at the message for long minutes. Part of him hoped she had reconsidered, but another part, the wounded but wiser one, knew Sophia probably had other intentions. They met again at Central Café. Sophia arrived more beautiful than ever, dressed in a new blue dress, her hair perfectly styled, makeup impeccable, the smile that once melted him but now seemed calculated to him. Sophia said she had understood she had been too harsh. True love meant being together in difficulties, facing challenges together, She had thought maybe they could find a solution, even for the child. Alexander felt his heart accelerate, but something in Sophia's tone didn't convince him. When he asked what kind of solution, she leaned toward him, taking his hands. She said he was intelligent and capable. He would surely find a way to recover, and she wanted to be by his side. Regarding Emma, Sophia smiled with cold eyes. She had thought maybe the best thing for the child would be a more appropriate environment, a good boarding school where she could receive the best education. That way, they could concentrate on rebuilding without distractions. Alexander felt his stomach turn. Sophia wanted to send his daughter to boarding school, remove the obstacle. She hadn't come back for love, but because she had calculated it was convenient for her to stay with a rich man temporarily in difficulties. Alexander decided to reveal the truth. He took out his wallet and put his black credit card on the table, the one reserved for fortunes over $100 million. Then he showed his bank account with an 8-digit figure. He explained he had never lost anything. The company was doing better than ever. Emma's story was false. She was his niece. Everything had been a test to see who she really was. Sophia's face went from confusion to shock, then to anger. She asked how he could have lied to her like that. Alexander replied he wanted to see if she loved him for who he was or for what he had. Sophia exploded, calling him crazy. Alexander replied, maybe he was, but at least now he knew the truth. Sophia left, slamming the door, but not before saying she hoped he would be happy with his paranoia and mental games. She deserved something better. Alexander replied that yes, she deserved someone as rich as him, but stupid enough not to realize what she really was. He remained seated, looking at the credit card on the table. He had spent 3 years in his heart to discover a truth his friends had understood in 3 days, but maybe it had been the most valuable lesson of his life. In the months that followed, Alexander went through what he would later define as the most difficult, but also most illuminating period of his life. He decided to take a break from Madrid's social world, from those mundane events where he always met the same faces that smiled at his money. One day, walking through Soho, he entered a small independent bookstore. He had never been there before. Normally, he ordered books online, but that afternoon he just wanted to walk and breathe. Behind the counter was a woman about 30 years old, curly hair and a messy bun, reading glasses on her head, a genuine smile that wasn't trying to sell anything. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Books are therapy." Her name was Elena, Alexander discovered, and she had left a job at a major publishing house to open that bookstore. She wanted a place where books were still magic, not just products. Alexander began to frequent the bookstore regularly. He never said his last name, never talked about his work. To Elena, he was simply Alexander, a customer who loved to read and who gradually became a friend. Elena didn't know who he was. She had never searched his name on Google, never asked questions about his economic means. When Alexander arrived by taxi instead of with his driver, she didn't pay attention. When he wore jeans and a sweatshirt instead of designer clothes, she seemed to appreciate him more. One afternoon, while drinking tea and discussing a novel, Elena asked if he was always so sad. He had that look of someone who had lost something important. Alexander answered honestly that he had lost something important, or rather had discovered he had never had it. Elena nodded without asking more questions, without morbid curiosity. She said sometimes losses were disguised gains, that they freed you from things you thought you wanted, but that actually hurt you. That night, Alexander returned home and for the first time in months, smiled really. Elena knew nothing about his story with Sophia. She didn't know about the test he had done. She had no idea about his fortune. However, she had hit the nail on the head. Maybe Sophia had really been a disguised gain dressed as a loss. Maybe all the pain had served to lead him to that bookstore, to meet someone who saw him for what he was, not for what he possessed. For the first time in months, Alexander began to think that maybe true love really existed. It was just found in places where you had never looked for it. 2 years after the test that had destroyed his relationship with Sophia, Alexander found himself again sitting at table number 12 at Central Café, but this time he wasn't alone, and above all, wasn't there to test anyone. Elena was sitting across from him, her curly hair catching the morning light, her eyes shining as she told him about the latest book presentation at her bookstore. She wore a simple blue dress she had bought with her own money, earned honestly selling stories and dreams. Alexander watched her talk and felt that peace he had never experienced with Sophia. With Elena, he didn't have to pretend to be different. He didn't have to hide or reveal anything. He was simply Alexander, and that was enough. Alexander decided the time had come to reveal everything to her. He told her he wasn't what she thought, that his last name was Vasquez. Alexander Vasquez. Elena remained silent for a moment. Then she asked if she should recognize that name. Alexander explained he was quite rich, very rich, billions to be precise. Elena looked at him for long seconds, then burst out laughing. He, the guy who came to the bookstore by subway and got emotional reading Garcia Lorca, was a multi-billionaire. When Elena asked why he was telling her now, he took out a small blue velvet box and put it on the table. He wanted to ask her to marry him, and thought she should know what she was getting into. Alexander told her he loved her for how she read poetry aloud, for how she got emotional when someone bought a book she liked, for how she looked at him when he told her about his days. He loved her because in 2 years she had never asked what he did for work, because it was enough for her that he was happy. Elena looked at the box, then raised her eyes to him, asking what would happen if she said no, if she refused to marry a multi-billionaire. Alexander replied he would love her even more, and asked if she wanted to marry simply Alexander, the one who got emotional with Garcia Lorca. Elena opened the box. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant without being vulgar, perfect for her. She said it was beautiful, but she had one condition: prenuptial agreement. She didn't want a single dollar of his money. Her bookstore, her independence, her life had to remain hers. She would marry Alexander the reader, not Alexander the multi-billionaire. Alexander looked at her and understood he had found what he had been looking for all his life without knowing it. Not a woman who wanted to share his wealth, but a woman who wanted to preserve her own poverty to be with him. As Alexander put the ring on her finger, he thought about Sophia. He wondered if she had ever managed to find her perfect rich man, if she was happy in her life of calculations and conveniences. Then he stopped thinking about it, because Elena was already asking about Emma and the story that had led them there. Some tests destroy everything. Others, like Alexander's, destroy everything that is false to make room for what is true. And sometimes destruction is the most beautiful gift life can give you. Did this story impact you? Did it make you reflect on what love really is and how much appearances can deceive? If you also believe true love doesn't look at bank accounts, that the right people love you for who you are and not for what you have, and that sometimes it's necessary to lose everything to understand what's really worth keeping, give it a like and share this video. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever suspected someone loved you only out of interest? Do you think Alexander was right to test Sophia? Do you think true love still exists in a world where everything seems measured in money? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the deeper sides of love, the difference between appearance and reality, and the value of being authentic in a world full of masks. Like, comment, share, because every story reminds us that the greatest wealth is being loved for who we are, that truth always hurts but frees us, and that sometimes pretending to be poor can reveal who are really rich at heart.